Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're heading straight into Cold War territory with a fascinating document, a declassified CIA weekly summary from June 20th, 1950.
Think of it like a time capsule, giving us a snapshot of what intelligence analysts were really focused on at that time.
It's like peeking behind the Iron Curtain and into the minds of the CIA's Western Europe division.
Exactly. We get to see their priorities, their concerns, even how they assess their rivals.
And our first stop on this Cold War journey takes us to East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, or GDR as it was known. The report paints a really interesting picture of their economic situation.
Well, remember, they had elections coming up in October.
Right.
So they were pulling out all the stops to make things look good, to present this image of economic success. We see things like price reductions in state-run stores, even talk of potentially ending rationing on most goods.
So kind of like a look how great things are under communist rule campaign.
Yeah, you could say that. But the document also highlights some other measures that make you wonder about their true intentions. Like they were prioritizing state-run stores with higher quality goods, increasing pressure on farmers to boost production.
I see.
And even considering using credits from a trade agreement with Poland to import even more goods. It all points to an effort to create this facade of abundance, maybe more for propaganda than actual economic well-being.
It makes you think about how people were actually experiencing life in East Germany at the time. Were they buying into this image of prosperity, or were they, seeing through it? There's also this mention of a potential currency conversion they were considering, something about reducing the difference in value between the East German mark and the West German mark. What was that all about?
That's a fascinating detail. Imagine you're living in Berlin at the time, maybe with family or friends on the other side of the wall. That difference in currency values would have had a huge impact on daily life, especially for those trying to do any kind of cross-border trade or even just communicate.
Right, makes sense. So while the communists in East Germany were busy trying to project this image of success, the report shows that their comrades in Austria were facing a bit of a different reality.
Oh yeah, their attempt to hold a peace congress in Vienna turned into a bit of a PR nightmare, actually.
Really?
The document highlights the poor attendance, especially compared to a rival rally organized by the People's Party.
Ouch. Not a good look.
It was a pretty clear sign that the Austrian Communist Party was losing its grip on the public. And to make matters worse, those big-name international figures they advertised never showed up.
I was just going to ask about that. So it seems like even within the communist world, there were some cracks starting to show.
For sure. It really speaks to the shifting political landscape in Austria. The communist message just wasn't resonating the way it used to. And the document also mentions this peace declaration signature campaign they tried to launch didn't exactly go as planned.
What happened?
Well, it seems their attempt to showcase widespread support for this peace movement backfired. The numbers they reported were way off, and other groups like the government, political parties, even the Catholic Church, actively campaigned against it.
Wow, so they were facing pushback from all sides. It sounds like the Austrian people and institutions were not going to be swayed so easily. Okay, so we've seen an attempt to control the narrative in East Germany, a faltering communist foothold in Austria. Let's move on to France. What was the CIA watching there?
Labor unions, specifically the General Confederation of Labor, or CGT, they had strong ties to the Communist Party and held a lot of sway. The document takes a close look at recent Social Security elections where the CGT secured 45.5% of the vote.
That sounds like a lot, but...
Right, it's actually a decline of their previous dominance. And there are a couple of things that stand out. First, a large number of workers didn't even vote, which might indicate a lack of engagement or enthusiasm. And second, they highlight this election at the Michelin plant in Clermont-Ferrand. A dynamic leader from the non-communist force Ouvrier Union managed to outmaneuver the CGT and win a majority of seats.
So even in a place you might consider a communist stronghold, a compelling leader could really shift things.
Exactly. It suggests that the CGT's grip wasn't absolute. With the right leadership and organization, those non-communist unions could definitely compete.
Fascinating. Okay, from labor dynamics in France, let's jump over to a simmering geopolitical dispute, the Netherlands and Indonesia.
Ah, yes. This one's all about control of New Guinea.
Right. Fill us in on the background here.
So, Indonesia had recently gained independence from the Netherlands, but they also wanted New Guinea, which was still under Dutch control. It's that classic post-colonial situation. The newly independent nation wants to assert itself, but the former colonial power is reluctant to let go.
And I imagine with Australia also voicing opposition to Indonesian control of the region, things got even more complicated for the Netherlands.
Absolutely. The document really highlights that possibility of a direct clash between them, which would have had ripple effects on all sorts of other issues. And internally, the Dutch government was divided. Some wanted to compromise, but others were determined to hold on to New Guinea.
You can almost feel the pressure mounting on them. Talk about a diplomatic tightrope walk. Okay, let's shift gear from the tension in New Guinea to, well, a slightly more hopeful situation, Italy.
Yes. Amidst all the Cold War anxieties, the report actually paints a fairly positive picture of the Italian economy. They were seeing a number of encouraging signs that pointed towards recovery after World War II.
Okay, so what was looking up for them?
Well, they were seeing a rise in industrial production, wholesale prices were stabilizing, and demand for goods was increasing. Inventories were shrinking too. Plus, the steel and automotive industries were showing growth, and bankruptcies, which had been a big problem, were starting to decline.
Sounds like they were finally catching a break. Was this a full-blown economic boom or more of a cautious recoverment?
It was more of a step in the right direction, but there were still some challenges. The report does mention that the Italian stock market was still struggling, and foreign trade had decreased compared to the previous year.
So some reason for optimism, but with a dose of reality too. Were there any particular areas of concern that they flagged?
Yes, they specifically highlighted the issue of high unemployment in Italy. They recognized that true recovery would depend on addressing that and creating opportunities for people.
A good reminder that economic numbers only tell part of the story. Okay, from Italy, let's move on to a diplomatic challenge unfolding in the Horn of Africa. Eritrea, what was happening there?
So Eritrea was a former Italian colony, and its future was very much up in the air. Italy, while softening its earlier stance on full independence, was definitely opposed to Ethiopia annexing it. But that's exactly what Ethiopia wanted.
Classic territorial dispute. What was the CIA's perspective on all of this?
The report suggests that a federation between Eritrea and Ethiopia might be a workable compromise. It would give Eritrea some autonomy while still satisfying Ethiopia's desire for unification.
So finding that middle ground, why was this particular dispute such a focus for the CIA?
The report emphasizes the strategic importance of the East African region. A stable Eritrea and good relations between Italy and Ethiopia would benefit U.S. interests in that part of the world.
It all ties back to that bigger picture of the Cold War, doesn't it? Okay, our final stop on this whirlwind tour of the CIA Weekly Summary takes us to Spain, where General Franco was busy consolidating his power. The report focuses on his visit to Bilbao, a center of Basque resistance. What was the significance of that visit?
It was very much a calculated move. Franco wanted to project this image of control and popular support, especially in a region known for its opposition to his regime. The document talks about the staged, festive atmosphere, his attempt to downplay any signs of discontent.
So putting on a show for the world.
Exactly. But the report makes it clear that beneath the surface, there was still a lot of Basque resentment.
And how did Franco deal with that?
Well, he wasn't exactly known for his gentle touch. The report details the crackdown on Basque leaders, the suppression of their language, and even a move to divide the Catholic Diocese of Vitoria.
Whoa, dividing a diocese, that seems extreme. What was the thinking behind that?
It was seen as a way to exert more control over the region and undermine Basque identity. By appointing bishops loyal to the regime, Franco could further extend his influence.
So using both political and religious institutions to solidify his power. It's a chilling reminder of what authoritarian regimes are willing to do.
It certainly highlights Franco's methods and the anxieties that drove him.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already in this first part of our deep dive into the CIA Weekly Summary. From economic maneuvering in East Germany to those diplomatic complexities in Eritrea and the political situation in Spain, it's been an eye-opening look into the Cold War world.
It's really amazing how much this one document tells us about what was happening during the Cold War.
You're right. It's like every page reveals something new, but amidst all the conflict and tension, the report also highlights some positive developments, especially when it comes to diplomacy.
There were definitely signs of hope. One that stands out is the situation in Trieste, that port city on the Adriatic Sea.
Ah, Trieste, right. It was a real flashpoint after World War II with both Italy and Yugoslavia claiming it.
Yeah, a real tug of war, and the report indicates that they were actually making progress towards resolving it.
Really?
Both Italy and Yugoslavia seemed willing to compromise, which was a good sign in such a tense environment.
So maybe a little thawing of those Cold War relations. What about the US and UK? What role did they play?
Well, the report suggests they were actively involved trying to mediate the dispute and find a solution that worked for everyone. Their goal was to keep Trieste from becoming a trigger for a larger conflict.
Which was a real possibility at that time, right? Makes sense. It's interesting to see that kind of behind-the-scenes diplomacy at work, trying to prevent things from escalating. But even as they were dealing with Trieste, another concern was brewing. Greece?
Greece was still dealing with the aftermath of that brutal civil war.
Right.
And the communist threat was still very real. The report highlights the struggles the Greek government was facing trying to rebuild their economy and maintain stability.
Yeah, it's easy to forget that even when the fighting stops, the effects of conflict linger for a long time. What did the CIA see as the key to preventing Another communist resurgence.
Continued U.S. support, both economic and military. They viewed Greece as a crucial buffer against Soviet expansion in the Mediterranean.
So another piece on that Cold War chessboard, and speaking of strategically important players, the report also turns its attention to Turkey.
Oh, absolutely. Turkey was another key ally for the West, and their upcoming elections were a big deal. The report really dives into the challenges the government was facing and what might influence the outcome.
What were the big issues at play? What were people most concerned about?
Two main things: the economy and the threat of communist influence. Even though it was officially banned, the Turkish Communist Party was still active underground.
So even outlawed, they were still a force to be reckoned with. How was the government handling that?
They were definitely taking steps to counter communist propaganda and infiltration, but it was tough. They were constantly on edge trying to stay ahead of a hidden enemy.
It reminds you that the Cold War wasn't just fought with tanks and soldiers, but with ideas and information too. It was a battle for hearts and minds. Okay, from Turkey, let's shift to a very different kind of conflict, the war in Indochina.
Ah, yes. The situation in Indochina was incredibly complex. The French were trying to hold on to their colonial possessions in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, but they were facing a determined communist insurgency led by Ho Chi Minh.
It sounds like a losing battle. What were the main challenges they were up against?
The report highlights several things: the difficult terrain, the lack of support for their cause, and the growing strength of the Viet Minh, those communist-led forces.
At what point did the French realize they couldn't win? And where did the U.S. stand on all of this?
Well, the document shows that the U.S. was providing some support to the French, but there's definitely a sense of uncertainty about the long-term viability of that. The report raises the question, what happens if the French are forced to withdraw?
A question with huge implications, not just for Indochina, but for the whole world. From the battlefields of Indochina, let's turn to something a little less dramatic, but equally important: international trade.
It's interesting to see how the report delves into the trade relations between Western Europe and the Soviet bloc. Even with that ideological divide, they were still doing business with each other.
What were they trading? Was it just basic goods or something more sensitive?
It seems like it was mostly raw materials and industrial goods. The Soviets wanted things like machinery and technology from the West, while Western Europe was interested in Soviet oil, timber, grain, that kind of thing.
So a bit of give and take, a necessary arrangement maybe?
Yeah, but there was definitely tension surrounding it. Western governments worried that the Soviets might use these economic ties to gain leverage or exert influence. It led to debates about how much interaction was too much.
So even trade became a part of that Cold War chess game. And speaking of strategic moves, the report also talks about another key battleground: propaganda.
The battle for hearts and minds was just as fierce as any military conflict. The report highlights how sophisticated the Soviet propaganda machine was, using radio, newspapers, films, all sorts of media to get their message out there.
Trying to win over not just their own people, but the rest of the world too. What about the West? How were they responding to that?
They were trying to counter it, of course, but the report suggests they were often on the back foot, struggling to keep up with the Soviets.
It sounds like an intense information war with both sides trying to control the narrative. And in a way, it's a battle that's still going on today.
Absolutely. The methods might have changed, but the struggle to shape perceptions and win over hearts and minds that never really ends.
From trade to propaganda, this document really reveals how complex the Cold War was. It was so much more than just military confrontations. But there's one final piece of the puzzle we haven't explored yet: espionage. It's crazy to think about everything we've uncovered already in this one document, from diplomacy to economics, even propaganda. It really paints a vivid picture of the Cold War world. But now we're getting to the part that I think everyone finds the most fascinating: espionage.
The world of spies and secrets. And the report doesn't disappoint. It dedicates a good chunk to discussing espionage activities on both sides, the Soviets and the West.
So give a rundown. What kind of spy stuff are we talking about here?
Well, it talks about Soviet efforts to infiltrate Western governments and organizations. They wanted to steal secrets, of course, and spread disinformation to create chaos and confusion.
Classic Cold War spy tactics.
Exactly. And on the flip side, it touches on the West's counter-espionage activities, recruiting their own agents, gathering intelligence on Soviet operations, trying to stay one step ahead.
It's like something out of a movie. All those secret meetings, double agents, and high-stakes missions. It adds a whole new layer to our understanding of the Cold War.
Absolutely. And while the document gives us some glimpses into that world, a lot of it is still shrouded in secrecy, which just makes it all the more intriguing, right?
It definitely makes you wonder what else is out there waiting to be declassified. It also makes you realize just how important intelligence gathering and analysis must have been during this time.
Oh, without a doubt. Knowledge was power, especially in a conflict as complex and unpredictable as the Cold War. Both sides knew that having the best information, being able to anticipate your opponent's moves, that was critical.
It was a constant chess match trying to outmaneuver each other. Well, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into this incredible CIA Weekly Summary from June 20th, 1950. We've covered so much ground. From the economic struggles in East Germany to those diplomatic efforts in Eritrea, from the political tightrope walk in Spain to those clandestine espionage operations, it's been an amazing journey.
It really shows you just how interconnected everything was during the Cold War. And it reminds us that history isn't just about dates and events. It's about the people who lived through those times, their stories, their choices, their hopes and fears.
And so many of the themes we see in this document, the importance of diplomacy, the dangers of extremism, the fight for freedom, they still resonate today, maybe even more so in our current world.
That's a great point. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What connections do you see between the world of 1950, as shown in this CIA report, and the world we live in now? What lessons can we learn from the past to help us face the challenges of today? Something to think about.
And always remember, this is just one small piece of a much larger puzzle. There are countless other declassified documents out there waiting to be discovered and explored, each one offering a unique window into the past. So until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.